Being broadcast on Facebook Live.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Extraordinary Council meeting on the 16th of January 2024 from Murrumbidgee Council. We pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the lands and waters of the Murrumbidgee local government area and to all Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging. We are committed to honouring the continuing connection that First Australians hold to Murrumbidgee's land, waters and community as one of the oldest living cultures in human history. In the spirit of open, accessible and transparent government and to ensure this meeting is open to the public, this council meeting is being recorded and live streamed to the Murrumbidgee Council Facebook page. A recording will also be placed on Council's website following the meeting. I'll ask for any apologies and applications for leave or leave of absence by councillors. No, I think everybody, no, is Tim is on. Oh, Tim's online. Tim and Gavin are both online, so there's no apologies. I would note that our General Manager, Mr. John Scarce, is also online. I will remind the councillors of disclosure of interest declarations. Are there any declarations that need to be ordered before we commence the meeting? Not. Okay. So in relation, we will move to item number 1 in the business paper, and these are the audited financial statements. And hand over to Caitlin.
So councillors will be aware that council has to present its audited financial statements at a meeting of council. So we've got Brad Bowen from Crowe Australasia, who are the auditors of council's financial statements, joining us this morning. But just to give you a quick update from our end, you'll recall that the draft financial statements were presented at the November 2023 meeting, and council had received an extension of time to prepare those statements and launch them and finalise a couple of outstanding issues. That extension of time was granted until the 22nd of December, and we've now received all of the auditors' reports. And as expected, we had a qualified opinion in relation to the RFS assets. Compared to those draft statements that were presented, there were really two main changes that I just need to draw to council attention, which were firstly, the accounting treatment of the Stronger Communities Fund grant income that was received. So the audit and Murrumbidgee Council reviewed the treatment of those funds in previous years and basically changed the timing of the recognition of those funds. So the cash position is exactly the same, but it's just an accounting difference as to when those funds are recognised. And then there was also an increase to the fair value of transport assets, which was just due on our part, which we corrected in the final financial statements. But I might go to Brad at this stage to.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. My name's Brad Bowen, as you said. So I'm Council's audit agent for the New South Wales Audit Office. We had our audit reports issued on the 15th of December. So as Caitlin points out, we applied for extensions with the OLG. And so fundamentally, we complied with the extension that was granted, which means that we continued to lodge our financial statements on time. That's a useful measure, and there needs to be sufficient recognition going to the finance team for the effort that went into generating the financial statements for June 2023. As Caitlin has pointed out, consistent with the prior year, council and a range of other rural councils in New South Wales, whilst they may have red fleet assets, they may have buildings on council-owned or Crown land, Murrumbidgee Council hasn't recognised any RFS assets, and on that basis, the New South Wales Audit Office has been qualifying on all councils in that space where that balance has been determined as a material amount. So council, consistent with its June 22 outcome, received an accept for opinion, specifically relating to financial recognition of the RFS assets, and that's a topic that has been well documented for a period of time, and so I'm very clear on council's stance, as is a range of other councils, with Leeton having a leading position on the non-recognition platform. The Audit Office issued 2 opinions, so a fairly standardised one on which concludes true or fair or not, which is the except for, and the other one is a conduct report, which has a bit more free-form text, and it's included within the financial statements that are made available for members of the public. The key items to call out from in there are that encouragingly, council continued to make a surplus, albeit fairly small, in the 23 year. A range of other councils with similar metrics are really struggling to get above break even once depreciation is factored in. That needs to be kept in context, though. The 23 year had some natural disaster activity at the front end of it through some flooding, and there was a range of grant funding available. Additionally, during the 23 year, the financial assistance grant, or people use the acronym FAG, was actually paid further in advance. It was already at 75%, and that stepped through to 100% in advance. What that means is that at some point in the future, it's totally possible that the provider of those funds will wind back that advance position, so i.e. no more income, and expect council to deliver something up to 365 days of that program without any new funds coming in. What councils do to address that is use restrictions. They restrict those funds to withdraw them from free spending of councils, and so it's really important to understand those restrictions genuinely do mean something. You've got external restrictions, which tend to be water and sewer orientated. They have to be spent for the purposes for which they were raised. And a range of internal restrictions, plant replacement, employee leave entitlements, but also the financial assistance grant. As Caitlin mentioned there, the trick or the challenge with grant recognition is you can't change the total amount of the grant. So if it's $1 million, it's always $1 million. What needs to be worked out is what period it's recorded in, because some of these grants extend over various time periods. Council has a 30 June balance date, and so the question is how much of that grant is recognised in 30 June 23. And it's determined that, for example, your financial assistance grant, it's not deemed to be sufficiently specific, so it's actually all cash accounting. It's taken to income on the day that it's actually received, albeit that we all understand in practical terms it's for funding future expenditure items. So there's a bit of a mismatch, and that makes then this concept of a surplus or a deficit really hard to track and follow. With the misalignment of revenue coming in relative to the period to which it relates. In the conduct report and in your financial statements, there are 2 other things we probably should just flag. There was a correction of a prior period error that Caitlin mentioned in her scene setter. That's outlined in the financial statements in quite some detail in a note down the back. It's in note G3-1, and it pertains to the 2 items that Caitlin mentioned. So some redistribution of the grant revenue, which was recognised, and a revaluation treatment on infrastructure assets. The other area that's covered in everyone's conduct report is the performance measures. Now, these are the old T Corp ratios, which again live down the back of your financial statements. Murrumbidgee passed all but one, which was own source funding in the FY23 year. Own source funding is a generic measure across all 128 councils and says, did you generate 60% revenue from your own revenue sources? Your council's profile is one where it relies on grant funding, and so you and a range of others, your results very consistent year on year, but you don't meet the benchmark of 60%. You could just stop applying for grant funding, and what that would do is mean that you would actually run a deficit result. So you need to work out which of those measures we're really aiming for, and I think the General Manager and myself would agree that in Murrumbidgee's scenario, that benchmark of 60% is really not tailored for the circumstances of Murrumbidgee. So don't be too perturbed. Read the ratios in a collective manner. And Murrumbidgee posts a respectable outcome for the year that it had in FY23. In closing, Mayor, really want to congratulate and thank the finance team for the support, together with your ARIC. You've got a very active and capable ARIC. They make recommendations to council, and I've attended a range of ARIC meetings and presented various materials in through there. So we appreciate that you've put that governance measure in place, and it assists with the positive financial management of council.
Thank you, Brad. Are there any questions from the floor while we have Brad online at the moment? I think it's very comprehensive. Like you, Brad, I would like to thank our staff and our ARIC committee for placing us in a respectable position, your words. You know, in life we only worry about the things we can change, and that own source revenue was designed to make us fail, so we don't take that personally. While our organisation is working to the best of its ability to provide what local government is supposed to provide, we as a council are happy with that. 38% about is quite consistent, so we are diligent in our management of where we spend and what we do. We have good guidance in that from our leadership group. So I think like to, again, to use your words, this is a very respectable outcome. My concern is I don't like having qualified audit hanging over our head. Is there any movement in this RFS issue, Brad, that you know that we don't? Bad business to take responsibility for things you've got no say or no control over, and that's our stand.
Yes, no, so I understand the stance. I think the agreed position seems to be, from the conciliatory one of both sides, is when there's a legislation change, the RFS will then look more like your SES type outcome, where it's an on-balance conversation, which means it's principles based, and so different people looking at the same set of facts might interpret that differently. The one that seems to be motivating the audit office into it's controlled by council, because you don't have to own it, is this vesting language, and even that it can be interpreted different ways. But once the vesting language is changed in legislation, these items will come off council's books. So I think what the mayor's pointing out for everyone else is essentially the position you've currently got and being qualified on will ultimately perhaps be the position that everyone else has to adopt in order to obtain a clean opinion. But we aren't there yet, and that's going to take a legislation change. There's people agitating for it, Mayor, but I'm not aware that it's getting, that it's highly likely for June 24. It's a watch this space thing, but that takes time to get through the processes.
So, Councillor McRae,
Yes.
Caitlin, do you want to say what OLG's done instead of me doing it over the video?
Yeah, sure. So the OLG has released their Code of Accounting Practice for 2024, which is basically the guidelines that we have to follow in preparing these financial statements. As part of those guidelines, the code, historically, they've left it open to the interpretation of individual local governments, individual councils, to determine whether they do in fact control the RFS assets or not. In the 2024 version, they have basically said if they're material, they need to be included. So that's disappointing from our perspective. Yeah.
I just had a question on that. I read that letter from the Auditor General. In what respect do they say we have control?
Yeah.
I mean, what do we have control of? Can we say, no, we can't send the trucks out? Or if we're supposed to, Sydney catches on fire and we've got our out-of-area trucks supposedly going up, and council says, no, we're not sending any trucks. Do we have that sort of control? What sort of control do they think we have?
You've got anything to add, John?
If I get myself off mute, I think the measure 100% in emergency scenarios, council does not have control. I think if you measure it across 365 days, though, The question is when the truck sits dormant in the shed, because it's non-emergency scenario, is that when council has control? And is that on percentage terms more or less than the days when council does not have control across the course of the year? I think that's the, it's a challenging argument, but I think that's the logic.
And probably what they've also pointed to is that the supposed agreements that council has with RFS, which actually states that because the assets are vested in our hands in accordance with the Act, as we all disagree with, that the Commissioner for Fires or whoever it is, or the local guys, can take our machines without asking us anything. That's the agreement that we've got. We don't have an agreement with RFS at the moment, but that's what is supposedly another chorus of their argument. It's just one of those things. I've fought with Auditor Generals most of my life because they've got no idea of reality or what happens in the real of how councils work. I've even had auditors from the audit office come and say to me, "Why haven't we got a provision for doubtful debts for rates?" And I have to turn around and tell them it's because we can sell the property. We don't have to have a provision of doubtful debts. It's actually ours. So they've got no bloody idea. They've got no clue. They don't understand that that they're not sitting in a shed, that they could be sitting anywhere. They'll be sitting beside a harvester when they're harvesting, because that could catch on fire, and that's the best place for it to be at the time. So there's a lot of those scenarios that they've got no idea about. So it's going to be a lost argument. I've asked Caitlin to start working on what we need to do, as if we're going to include them in our financial statements, and we'll make that decision towards getting closer to it. But we'll certainly do all the work that we need to now.
It's a serious level of seriously, how much more time are we going to waste on this argument? Sometimes you just have to stand your ground. But thanks anyway, Brad, for your input, and I'm sure that John and Caitlin will guide us through that. Like the Office of Local Government, they send down the edicts, but they're not the real world either. So it being televised, isn't it? Probably shouldn't have said that. Never mind. But they're a bit like the Auditor General. I get out here and live in the real world. But we need to play by the rules, and it does irritate me that this causes us to have a qualified audit when everything else is being done, in an exemplary manner. It just, it's wrong. But we have to play by the rules, apparently. That's today. That's what we should be doing. So thank you very much. Are there any other questions of Brad? If not, thank you very much, Brad, for your report. We appreciate your time and your input, and it's nice to hear the feedback that our staff and our compliant committees are doing exactly what they need to do to keep us functioning as well as we can. So thank you.
No problem. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Are there any further questions of Caitlin? No? If not, we'll move to the recommendation. Would somebody like to move the recommendation, please? Move Councillor Black. Seconded Councillor Churchman. And the recommendation will read that the audited financial statements encompassing the general purpose financial statements, the special purpose financial statements and special schedules for the year ended 30th of June 2023 be adopted. I'll put the recommendation. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you. We'll move to agenda item 2, and I'll ask the Deputy Mayor to take the chair, please, because I have a conflict in this space.
And Councillor McRae or Councillor Black, I'll put my computer on mute, so when I see the Mayor come back into the chair, I'll know it's time to come back off mute.
That'll be next year.
Thank you, John. I now call on the Director of Planning. Run us through this, please.
Thank you. Through you, Deputy Mayor. This report deals with an offer council has received from the Drury Independent Living Limited Council land at 12 and 14 Bunyola Boulevard, Drury. Part of the background, council in June 2018 resolved to donate to the Drury Independent Living Units 12 to 14 Bunyola Boulevard for the purposes of building independent living units. 4 independent units were then constructed on 16 and 18. Actually, 16 and 18 were consolidated into the one lot. The Drury Independent Living Units Limited now come back to council to say they no longer require 12 and 14, and have offered them back to council at no cost. So the recommendation is from staff that council accept the offer, that all costs associated with the transfer be at council cost. Common seal of council will be placed on any documents as required, and 12 and 14 be designated as land for construction of future 4 2-bedroom units.
For council.
Yeah.
For council. So that make that important. That is moved. Rob, maybe any questions first? Pretty straightforward.
Makes sense to me.
Councillor Kirby, seconded Councillor Major, and the recommendation will read that council accept the offer from the Drury Independent Living Limited to return to council land situated at 12 and 14 Bunyola Boulevard, Drury. 2. All costs associated with the transfer of the titles for 12 and 14 Bunyola Boulevard, Drury be borne by council. 3. The common seal of council be placed on documents as required. 4. 12 and 14 Bunyola Boulevard, Drury be designated as land for the construction of council's 4x2 bedroom units. I'll put that. Can you say yay?
Yeah.
In agreement?
Yeah.
All those against? Carried. Thank you very much. I'll now call on my mayor and to you take your seat. Thank you. Council. That's our congregation.
Done. Thank you. Thanks very much. Done the recommendation. We've had moved and seconded. Okay, so all right, so that concludes our meeting, our formal part of the meeting. I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and we will see you all at the beginning of February at our strategic planning workshop. So Julie, are we off to you?